Aurora Shooting Star is the newest addition to the Armory deck product line. Boasting a lightning-fast strategy, this deck seeks to send wide combat chains with things like Skyward Serenade and Skizzik, finishing the opponent off with a healthy dose of arcane damage from things like Arcanic Shockwave and the powerhouse Arc Lightning. With 4 brand new pieces of equipment, as well as several powerful new main deck cards, the Aurora Armory deck is a very strong out-of-the-box experience and is, in my opinion, the best Armory deck we have ever gotten. However, the base deck isn't what we're here for in this video. No, if you're watching this, then I'm willing to bet that you already have or plan to buy the Aurora deck. So what we're going to do today is spend about 55 or so USD upgrading the deck, getting it as close as possible to a tuned competitive list for a fraction of the price. Now, while I will quickly go over the upgrades first, I want to put my money where my mouth is and take the deck to my armory to see how it performs. But there's just one small issue. Neither of the game stores that I go to got the Aurora deck this time around. Apparently distribution was tighter this time, and so if I wanted to play the deck in person on the day of release, I had to drive to a city about an hour away. That meant that in order to make this video and get it out, somewhat close to when the deck releases, I had to give up 2.5 hours of my life just to do so, because there's no other possible way that I could get a hold of the deck in time. So anyways, I bought the deck online. Let's talk upgrades. As I said, my goal with upgrading this Aurora deck is to try and get it as close as possible to the more competitive builds that you'll see at events or find on Fabrary. Unfortunately though, we won't be including things like Gone in a Flash or Channel Lightning Valley due to their price. This especially hurts for Valley, as it's pretty much Aurora's best card and should definitely be your first pickup if you want to take the deck to the next level. However, I have managed to come up with an upgrade package and a full sideboard that will reflect a more tuned list, giving you a build that's more prepared to take on your armories. Starting off, we've got one equipment change with the boots. While Starlight Striders are great if you're needing to block breakpoints on things like a Leave No Witnesses or an opposing snatch, it's a little inconsistent to get the embodiment trigger when we want it. So instead, we're going to put Striders in the sideboard and run the Snapdragon Scalar's main board so we can have guaranteed go again when we need it. As for the deck itself, the biggest change I wanted to make was tuning up the attacks with more 0-for-4s with go again. To do this, I removed both the red and blue Arcanic Crackles, as well as the 3 Spark Sprays for copies of Red Ravenous Rabble, Scar for a Scar, and Second Strike. To make all that go again go over the top, we're going to include a fun little combo by swapping out one Photon Rush with a single mainboard copy of Flicker Wisp. This card doesn't do much on its own, as even when you fuse it, it's just 2 damage. But pair it with Arc Lightning, and suddenly every time you go again on your turn, you send 2 Arcane at your opponent. An opponent who's probably only running 1 Arcane Barrier into you. In order to lean into this raw power, we're removing the 3 Sizzle for the final copy of Arc Lightning, as well as 2 more copies of Electromagnetic Somersault. While Sizzle is a solid card if you're running Face Purgatory, we're not running that headpiece in this build, and so I'd much rather use that space to make the go wide strategy more consistent. The 3rd copy of Arc Lightning is self-explanatory, but the Electromagnetic Somersaults are a great addition to helping us abuse our attacks. This card can either let us block with 2 attacks and return them back to hand, or it lets us bounce a single attack on our chain to send it again. And the final change we're making to the main board is removing the 3 Captain's Calls for 3 Sigil of Lightning. It's a blue lightning instant that can give you an embodiment token, meaning that it can fit several roles in the deck. So now that we've upgraded the main board with some more 0-for-4s with go again, as well as some combo potential, it's time to look at the sideboard. As I said earlier, Starlight Striders are here as they are useful against decks with lots of breakpoints. Then we've got our pair of Arcane Barrier equipment in Vexing Quillhand and Crown of Dichotomy. While the Crown is mostly here for the AB, Quillhand also serves a second purpose of being an extra instance of go again if we are playing towards a Flicker Wisp combo turn. Speaking of Flicker Wisp, we do have the other 2 copies in the sideboard. Into the really slow matchups, I typically swap them out with the other 2 Photon Rushes. If you can set up 1 or 2 Flicker Arc turns against something like Florian or Enigma, you should be able to get over their defenses and kill them. In that same vein, we also have 3 copies of Exude Confidence. While we won't be using its own pump ability that often, being able to send this at the start of a turn with an embodiment puts defensive decks in a tough spot. If they don't block it with an attack that has at least 4 power, they won't be able to use defense reactions for the rest of the chain. I typically remove Scar for Exude when facing those D-react heavy decks. But we are still not done with those defensive decks, because we are also going to include 3 Sigil of Solace, which I use to replace Burn Up and Shock. While this might seem odd at first, since usually dealing more damage is the plan into defensive decks. Burn Up requires you to hit to get the 4 arcane, and when an opponent has a bajillion D-reacts, that can be a little hard to do. Instead, Sigil gaining you 3 life gives you more opportunity to take hits so that you can keep those big 4 to 5 card hands to push your damage through. But we're not all offense, and so to round out this sideboard, we do have a little bit of defense of our own with 3 Sink Belows and 1 Sigil of Suffering. Because assassins, well, exist, you're going to have games where you get disrupted over and over. So, taking out the electromagnetic somersaults for the sinks and the 1 copy of Flickerwisp for the Sigil is a good way to add a bit more defense without watering down the main strategy of 0 for 4 beatdown. I also would like to quickly note though that if you are picking up these upgrades for the deck, that you should probably just buy 3 copies of Sigil and Suffering in case you decide to upgrade this deck further. It paired with Channel Lightning Valley is just nasty good because you can draw cards on your opponent's turn, but without the Valley, it's just a decent enough defense reaction. So with the deck all upgraded, I guess all that's left is to go to my armory and test it out. Although, since that's happening later tonight, I'd like to take a quick moment to talk about what I was using to help me test this deck to figure out the upgrades: Codex Journals. Codex Journals are designed as an improvement tool specifically for Flesh and Blood. Whether it's testing with friends or playing at a pro tour, this book is a godsend when it comes to tracking and reflection. On one side, you've got a page to track life, which you can use during your games. Then, when the game is over, you've got a page with a bunch of details to fill out. You've got the obvious stuff like format and heroes, but then you have questions like whether or not you had a game plan or just how many turns were taken in the game. I personally don't fill out everything on this page, like how many cards were left in decks, but I did find it very helpful to be able to track whether I went first or second, what the life totals were at the end, and whether or not someone high rolled. Of course, the most useful parts of the Codex Journal are the last 2 boxes where you can fill out what your reflections and conclusions after your game were. While at first I didn't have a lot to say, I found that as I played more games with Aurora and used this Codex more, I was starting to leave more details for myself, which was very handy for making this video. On top of that, you've even got some notes at the very back, and hey, there's even a small section for tracking your drafts, you know, for the 4.5 of you that play that Godless format. If you're looking to seriously improve your Flesh and Blood skills, and you've got some extra cash after saving money on this budget Aurora deck, then you should consider heading to the description and picking up one of these for yourself.
Click the link below and use code Sloopdoop in all lowercase at your checkout to both save 10% off your order and help support the channel. Thank you.
That all said, looks like it's about time for my armory. Since I want to get this video out as close to the release of the deck as possible, I really hope nothing weird happens, but I'm probably worrying too much. I'm sure everything is going to be just fine. Hi. My name is Professor Ribbits. We here at Sloopdoop Incorporated care deeply about tackling the issue of both mis- and disinformation in the Flesh and Blood space. That is why I am here to correct the record, as the armory did not, in fact, go fine. We deeply apologize for this mistake, and we hope that you can still enjoy the rest of this video in spite of it. Thank you. Game 1 of my armory was versus Florian, which I was pretty happy with. I tested Aurora against my own Florian build that I let my friend use, so I felt pretty confident that I could just run him down. In fact, I felt so confident that I figured I could just throw in 1 piece of AB and leave the rest of the deck as is, so I could give you all a showcase of how it works unchanged. This meant no exudes, just 1 Flickerwisp. I didn't even have snappies because I still had them as a sideboard piece at this time. And yeah, this was a mistake. See, my Florian list is more aggressive leaning, but my opponent here was playing a defensive Florian, running Sink Below, Shelter from the Storm, Red and Yellow Root Bounds, as well as Haunting Rendition. Without my sideboard, it was going to be a challenge to punch through all that. But if that wasn't bad enough, my opponent gets to go first, playing a Germinate, making 4 rune chants, and more importantly, gaining 4 life. Perfect. That's exactly what an aggressive deck wants. More life to have to beat down. Already on the back foot, my turn 1 was just all right, where I sent a Pump Static Shock and got it through with a Lightning Press. It wasn't the greatest turn, but I did manage to get my opponent back to his base life, so that was something. Unfortunately, he then sends a Felling of the Crown, decomposing. So there goes a card from my hand, and 8 of my life thanks to those 4 rune chants. Just what I wanted turn 2. But whatever, I have an Arc Lightning and a Skyward Serenade, so I can clap back with a few attacks and some arcane damage. I really just need to get my opponent low on life, but of course, he pitches for the Arcane Barrier, and oh boy. So, y'all notice a little lack of something here? So, yeah, my opponent decided last second to side in Quick Dodge Flexor since he just recently got his copy and, you know, he wanted to test it out. But in doing so, he wasn't running the Null Rune boots. And neither of us noticed this, so he pays for the Arcane Barrier even though he doesn't have the equipment that lets him do so. And listen, I just want to make it clear this was not an attempt to cheat or anything on my opponent's end. It was just a genuine mistake. I've even done the exact same thing before where I thought I had Arcane Barrier even though I didn't, and you only notice later on in the game even though you've already pitched for it. And while I don't want anybody throwing shade, I do want you all to take a moment and comment below when you think we're gonna notice the lack of AB. Anyways, my opponent does a lot of legal and illegal blocking, and we proceed with the game. And this is where I start to regret not using my sideboard, specifically with Starlight Striders. Florian doesn't have any on-hits that I care about, and on the one turn where I really could have used the embodiment token for Go Again, I didn't have an instant. This meant that instead of saving my Arc Lightning for a better turn, I had to use it here to even get a turn. If only I had a pair of boots that gave guaranteed Go Again. Of course, that Arc Lightning also came with some arcane damage, and if you guess that this was the turn we realized my opponent didn't have AB, I mean, come on. Do you really think I would be setting it up this much if we realized this early into the game? Anyways, we proceed on as normal with Felling of the Crown and Plow Under are just taking huge chunks out of my life total and really putting a damper on my aggressive potential. But I do start to chip him down a little, wearing out his armor, and I notice he's already used a good amount of his defense reactions. And then we get to the play of no return. After I send a couple of attacks, my opponent decides to use his quick dodge flexors. He takes 2, and after considering the card in my hand, I just don't want to give him an extra free 2 block, so I arsenal the card. Now, up until this point, we could have easily saved the game state by just having him swap the flexors for null room boots. But now that he's used them, we can't do that. And the fact that I arsenaled my card instead of sending it meant that he had more life to work with for the rest of the game, meaning that things could have played out quite differently from this point on. But okay, like this has to be when we realize the mistake, right? Man, I could just see my credibility just fading into the distance at this moment, like just no. we didn't notice. I'm sorry. I don't know what you want me to say. We didn't notice yet, okay? You're gonna have to wait for that. We played out a few more turns where I was giving up my quickly dwindling life to keep as many cards in hand as possible to try and pivot. And honestly, considering this whole AB thing, the fact that I didn't even sideboard properly and his Florian deck cost like 10 times what my deck did, I think it's pretty impressive that I was doing all right and managed to get him down to 4. And then he just made a bunch of rune chants with Arcane Seeds, played a Trot Along, sent a Reaping Blade with 4 rune chants, and finished off the turn with a Swarming Gloomveil for 4. Thankfully, I could use the somersaults to return my blocks to hand and use them again and stay alive, but it didn't matter. Next turn, he threw an E-Strike at me, following up with his weapon, which was lethal. However, I ain't no bitch, so I pinged him for 1 in response.
1 arcane at you. That's all I got left.
Yeah, actually, I already have one for loading.
We don't have arcane barrier.
You have a good point. Yeah.
Actually, wait.
Wait.
Have you not run arcane barrier this whole game?
No.
Hey, at least we figured it out eventually.
Just went outside quickly to talk about that game 1. So we ended up giving me the win so we could avoid the bye. But unfortunately, gave me the bye anyways. I was looking to test the Aurora deck, was really excited about that. And then Jem decided it was going to screw me anyways. But just wanted to kind of reflect on that first game. I had completely forgotten that this Florian deck was going to run like 15 defensive cards on top of being able to block out the wazoo with everything else. So I really do think I should have brought in the Exude Confidences to stop the D-reacts. Should have brought in the Flicker Wisp just so I had more potential to combo. But, we really don't know how the game would have went. He didn't run AB, so technically I would have dealt like, I don't know, it was like 7 or 8 Arcane throughout the game with those 2 Arc Lightning turns especially. But even if he had run Arcane, he wouldn't have done the quick steps in that one turn where I just ended up arsenaled and ended my turn rather than sending more damage because he could chain it over. If he had to block with that card instead, 1 would have leaked through and I think I would have sent it because it was like a static shock or whatever I could have sent and dealt more damage. So I don't really know how the game would have went because I would have leaked 4 more on that turn and then he wouldn't have the 4 at the end of the game that he did when we ended. So it's a big question mark as to who would have won that. But for now, I guess we'll just have to sit through this round and wait for them to be done and then I can get back in there and hopefully get a win with my final game.
As scuffed as this armory had been, round 3 got paired, and before me lay a chance for redemption. I managed to dodge some pretty nasty matchups in Jarl and Mario, and was now facing... This wasn't a defensive Florian deck that would occasionally hit me with a Felling or a Plow. This was a full-on OTK deck, albeit one missing the grasps. But because I knew that this deck was only going to be blocking and building up rune chance until he had enough to kill me, I knew that I would have some time to set up in the game if I sideboarded correctly, and I wasn't gonna make the same mistake twice. I put snappies in their rightful place in the main board and also ran the Crown and Quill hand. Of course, I swapped the 2 Photon Rushes for Flicker Wisps, Scar for Exudes, and Sigil of Solace for the Burn Up and Shocks. And after winning the die roll, I decided to go first, both so my opponent didn't get a free setup turn, and also so I could arsenal for a bigger turn myself. And thank God I chose to do this because I drew a terrible hand with 2 Skizzic. So I threw a lightning attack, pitched them both to make an embodiment, and then arsenaled and passed. And then I am immediately rewarded again for going first because my opponent had a Millennium Tree and he fires off 4 Arcane with the Scepter, of which I blocked 2 to reduce the rune chant generation. I then just send my hand at him, he blocks a bit, and then I take 4 more from the Millennium Tree before his turn ends, and it thankfully leaves. So with the tree gone, I was free to go gorilla mode and just kind of threw my cards at him to give myself a very comfortable life lead, which was exactly what I wanted. My opponent does try to use an Arcane Cussing at one point, but I block the Arcane from the Scepter and then use an Arc Lightning the next turn to destroy it and give my opponent nothing. And you might say that this was a little petty and I should have just saved the Arc Lightning for a better turn, but Arcane Cussing was my spoiler card from Rosetta, so there's no way on God's green earth that I can just let it be used against me. And I wasn't just done with that. Oh no, after such a disastrous game 1, I had to show this flower-loving nerd who was the real girl boss around here. Arc Lightning, ping, into a fused Arcanic Shockwave, ping, ping, somersault it back, activate Quill Hand for 2 rune chants, ping, activate Chest, ping, swing with sword for 2 and 2, and you'll never guess this, but ping, play a Sigil from Arsenal and gain 3, then finish the turn with a final fused Arcanic Shockwave and a final ping, putting the Lightning Surge in hand into my now open arsenal. You know, I think I'm starting to get why people love playing Aurora so much. This deck is fun. My opponent does try to gain some life to give him a bit of a buffer, but I have dealt just so much damage so damn fast that he really just hasn't been able to make many rune chants. And since I was still at 37, I knew that I didn't have to worry about dying anytime soon. So even though I drew a clunky hand, it didn't really matter. I even drew a Flicker Wisp that I'd already used my Arc Lightning, so chances are I wasn't going to line them up. Until I remembered something. Now, I don't know about any of you, but every single time that I have played Crown of Dichotomy, I have only ever used it for AB. I have played this game for over 4 years, and I don't think I have ever once used the ability on this card. Most of the time, I forget it's even there, but it lets me put a Runeblade attack and non-attack action back on top of my deck. And I have Arc Lightnings in my grave. Oh, baby, it's combo time. So yeah, I just kind of spend my turn attacking with the Lightning Surge in Arsenal, making an embodiment, and activating Crown to put Arc Lightning and Arcanic Shockwave back on top of my deck. Then after putting the Flicker Wisp in my now empty arsenal, I pass the turn to my unsuspecting opponent, who just plays up Read the Runes. But hey, Florian is turned on, so he does make 4 of them. Anyways, it's time for murder. Flicker Wisp. Fuse, 2 Arcane. Arc Lightning, 2 Arcane. Arcanic Shockwave fused with Go Again for 2 Arcane, and 4 Physical. Sword for 2 and 2, making an embodiment. Then finally, a Static Shock with Go Again for 2 Arcane, 4 Physical, and 2 Arcane on hit. Take that, you emo son of a bitch!
He's already dead!
Well, that didn't go exactly how I envisioned it. I was really hoping to have gotten 3 solid games against different heroes, but instead I got a completely scuffed game 1, a bye, and then I just kind of bullied the goth hippie to death. That said, I do hope you guys enjoyed getting to see this deck in action a little bit. The Aurora Armory deck is already quite impressive out of the box, and these upgrades are going to get you as close as you can to a tuned build before you really start having to spend the big bucks. Like, I wanted to include Channel Lightning Valley, but I couldn't justify another $75+. But again, if you are upgrading this past what I've come up with, CLV should be the first thing you grab. You should also think about grabbing yourself a Codex Journal if you really want to improve at Flesh and Blood. Again, this thing has been super useful so far with building decks, but it can also help you improve your skills as a player. I'm very much looking forward to using this for future videos, and if you want one as well, there's a link in the description along with the upgraded deck list. With that all said, thank you for watching, and thank you to the patrons. I really appreciate all your support over the years, and I really hope you've all been enjoying these newer videos. Huge shout out to the Giga Chads Geeks first, Elixir, Vinny, John, Ty, Chemical, Bryant, Dark Memoria, and Big Hungry. Then we've got the Alpha Chads, Thomas, Zajima, and Aaron, and then there's the Super Chads, Thal, Cece, Ben, Yogbadoodles21, Scott, Kevin, and Wolf Shadowmancer. Thanks again as always, and stay Chadly, my friends.